Hi, I'm Amy. Welcome to my channel, and look who I've got with me. I'm so happy to have Connie Knox of GenealogyTV. I'm actually hanging out with her. I came into North Carolina.
Glad to have you.
It's so fun. It's been a great visit, and good friends are the best. So anyway, we were hanging out and just talking, and we decided we'd do a video where we each share some of our favorite genealogy stories, or at least one of them. And so I am sharing mine on her channel, and she is going to share one here with us today. So I'm so excited to hear your great story. So dive in. Thank you so much for doing this with me.
Thanks. I'm going to move this just a little bit because I'm going to turn my head so I can share my screen. So I'm going to tell the story about, we were talking earlier about how these stories sometimes are a little controversial.
Yeah.
And so that's the case with this one. So here I am talking about Rebecca Henley. And she is my great-grandmother, excuse me. This is my great-grandfather. Well, he was born out of wedlock. And this I have plugged in as the father, but I'm not 100% sure. And I have to explain that. The family lore is this. The family lore is, okay, let me back up. When I was researching this, I met a cousin. She's long since passed away, but I met her many, many years ago. And she had done a whole lot of research on this family. And she interviewed the granddaughter of Rebecca, who you saw in the family tree there a second ago. And the granddaughter had explained that she, as a little girl, used to sit under the sewing machine, Rebecca. Now, Rebecca here was a seamstress. So the granddaughter explained that she used to hide under the sewing machine while the adult women were having conversations. And one of the women were like wondering who the fathers, plural, of this woman was. She had several children. And so, I was sitting there trying to figure out who the father was. There was one record that said it was a guy named John Henley, which was bogus. And so what I did, here's how I solved this. Kind of solved it.
I can't wait.
There is one male cousin. This is one of the reasons why you want to do DNA testing. One male cousin who is a first cousin to my father. And he took a DNA test for me. I paid for it.
Was it an autosomal or Y-DNA?
It was Y-DNA, and I had him do autosomal DNA on Ancestry. And he was gracious. I've never met this guy in person, but I have communicated with him. Just last week I was emailing with him again. He's in his 80s now.
Wow.
And so he took this DNA test. He's the only living male relative that could have done this Y-DNA test from this branch of the family tree. And 4 matches came back on the Y-DNA. All of them with the surname of Davis.
Oh.
Now, it couldn't have been much worse. It could have been Smith, I guess. But Davis was pretty rough anyway. But it was like, okay, bingo. Now at least I know a surname to look for. Then I went back to autosomal DNA, and I started looking for Davis surnames in that branch of the tree. So what I did was, how you, maybe you don't know how to do this, but on Ancestry you can group your DNA matches to the ancestor. So this cousin that I asked to take the DNA test, I used him to group DNA matches to, and then split it to his paternal side of the family. And so then I'm sorting, digging down to the Davises. And I started coming up with not a lot, but a handful, probably a dozen DNA cousins, from which they all had the same family branch. And so I was able to then go, okay, this is where I'm going to go back to the tree now. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here one generation up, and then I'm going to go look at this guy. This is Joel Davis Sr. This is Joel Davis Jr.
Okay.
And so this is Joel Davis Sr., the elder. And so I'm looking for men, right? I'm trying to go, all right, I'm looking for men who could have been the father of my great-grandfather.
So did those DNA matches all take you up to Joel Davis Sr.?
Did those-
Was that your most recent common ancestor that you had with those DNA matches?
Yeah, well, I actually had DNA matches, third cousins, fourth cousins, so even higher in the tree.
Okay.
So I knew that this Joel Davis was my third great grandfather.
Okay.
I just didn't know which of
One of
these
his sons.
boys. There's Micaiah, who's the oldest. He never had any children, so cross him off the list. Then there's Jesse. There's Joel Davis Jr. There's Joshua. And there's Exum Davis. So I've got 4 boys. Any of them could have been. Now, Rebecca, my great-grandmother, great-great-grandmother, I keep getting that mixed up. She was born in 1828. So she's closest to Exum Davis here at the bottom of the list. But the Y-DNA, or excuse me, the autosomal DNA actually points to Joel Davis Jr. Let me explain this. So what I did was at the time, there's better technology to do this now, but at the time I did an Excel spreadsheet. And I put all of the DNA cousins and their centimorgan counts in. And when you're doing this kind of exercise, you got to keep in mind the generational difference, right? Because with autosomal DNA, it's cut in half with each generation. So I started with Joel Davis Sr., and I listed out all of the boys. And actually, and some of the girls too. And I listed them all out. And then I just built this whole descendancy tree using each line in the Excel spreadsheet for a different generation, because I needed to have, so when you're doing this stuff, you got to have an expectation of what the DNA should be.
Yeah.
Now you got to keep in mind too, that my great grandfather was a half sibling to any of the other.
Right.
So all
which
of
would
those,
dilute it further.
Which would dilute it further.
Yeah.
But there was one DNA cousin, actually from one of the females that was higher up in the tree, that had a cluster. Actually, let me back up. Joel Davis Jr. had a daughter named Lorena. Lorena's descendants had the most highest DNA counts. And I looked at one, and one of them was like 118 centimorgans. And I'm like, I've actually communicated with this woman. I still don't believe that her tree is absolutely correct, because it looks like a full descendant instead of a half.
Okay.
But all of the others were still higher that descended from Lorena, as opposed to any of the other boys. However, there's one caveat to this whole problem. And I still haven't solved it. I'll get, spoiler alert.
Okay.
Joel Davis Jr., who I thought, let me share the screen again and go back up to him. He had moved to Iowa by the time my great-grandfather would have been conceived.
Oh.
So, but all the other boys were still in North Carolina.
Okay.
So, my hypothesis was, for the longest time, was could Joel Davis Jr. have come back to sell land, to go to a funeral?
That's true.
To do any of this stuff.
Right.
Well, this was during the beginning of the Civil War era, and the newspapers had all shut down. So I didn't have that resource for that time period. I have hunted high and low. I have gone to county records. I'm not done.
Oh yeah, I totally. My story is the same way. I still have more to do.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, when those are the best stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I hope to get to the county courthouse and do some more digging over there and see if maybe all those deeds and everything are online now, a lot of them. And I have done a lot of land research to see if maybe he sold land. I'm looking for a signature and a date that puts him in the right place at the right time to have conceived that child. But I'm striking out. One more caveat.
Oh no.
Of all the boys, Joshua Davis is named in bastardy bonds, and so is Exum Davis, for her other children.
Oh, really?
Yes. And then I found a bastardy bond for my great-grandfather. So for those who are not familiar with what a bastardy bond is.
So tell us, what is that? What is the bastardy bond?
So that is, it originated in England, and it's mostly only in North Carolina and a little bit of Virginia, and I think Maryland has some too, but primarily North Carolina.
Okay.
And what it was when let me go back to this. What it was when a woman got pregnant out of wedlock, she basically, if the community ratted her out,
Yeah.
which they often did, they drug her into court because it's technically at the time against the law to have a child out of wedlock. So they drug her into court and said, name the father of that child. And if she refused, then they would note that in the records, but somebody had to put up a bastardy bond. And basically what that meant was that the county was not going to be liable for the upkeep of that child. So somebody had to put up a bond to take care of that child. And so the bastardy bonds, a lot of people like question me about this because I talk about, every time I tell the story, I talk about them. But they're really very limited to the South. And so those bastardy bonds, you can find them at the North Carolina State Archives. I've found them on Ancestry. There's a whole slew of them on Ancestry. But you have to do some good digging because the one record that I really needed to find for my great-grandfather, so the child is not named in bastardy bonds, but the date is there. So
Right.
if you know the dates, so we have Rebecca here, and we go to her profile. Let me show you this. So you can see that she had Joel Davis Jr. Was named in the bastardy bond for my great-grandfather. She also had a child named Margaret. Jonathan's named as the father in that bastardy bond.
So was Joel named as the father, or was he the one that put up the bond?
He's the one who put up the bond.
Okay.
So is
Because that can be different,
right?
correct?
So is that proof? No.
Yeah.
But, and that's the caveat, is like, while, okay, so we got Joshua Davis down here also, which is one of the younger sons. The bastardy bonds are going to name, like it might say, okay, Rebecca refuses to name the father, but Joshua Davis and John Doe step up to be bondsmen and promise to upkeep the child, take care of the children,
Right.
or the child in this case. And if they don't, they have to pay a $500 bond. So they don't actually pay the $500 until they default on
Gotcha.
on the bond, just like any other bond.
Like a marriage bond or something like
Any
that.
kind of bond is the same
Yeah.
way. So, long story short is I don't have the exact answer. I've got DNA that kind of points to one direction, but I've got a bastardy bond that points in a different direction. Will I ever solve it? So I've plugged in Joel Davis Jr. in here because of the DNA,
Right.
but it could have been any one of the sons. Now,
What a story.
I even went so far as to have Diane Southard look at this.
Yeah.
And we did an episode about it. And she gave me some interesting thoughts that I hadn't thought about. She said, what if Micaiah, the oldest son, who I said never had any children, never married, what if he had a child that you don't know about?
Yeah.
What if there's an extra layer in there you don't know about? Like, what if one of those children had a child that nobody knows about? And, you know, so I mean, it's just like, wow, there's so much to think about when it comes to that kind of stuff. So that's my my mystery story.
Wow. And you're right. It's maybe going to be a while or maybe never. That's the thing that kind of drives me crazy is when maybe you can never. It's something you're never going to really know. You're just not going to. But we can do our best to try to figure it out.
Well, the cool part about this particular story is I do have connections to these generations. So it's kind of like going up,
for sure.
out and down to some of these other people in the tree. So I know I can keep tracing back, and I've been working on it. I can keep working back in the tree knowing that I have a genetic connection to these guys.
Wow, that's such a good one.
Yeah.
And it shows what an advantage DNA is, right? Because we didn't have that for a long time. And now it can make all the difference when you're doing something like that. But that's pretty far back, too, into your family tree. So you're working with smaller amounts of DNA. And that made it more difficult, didn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the largest one was 118 centimorgans. She's an older lady. And then there was some younger generations, and as low as 18, I think, centimorgans.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when you start getting down there, I don't like to really go below 20 to 40, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
But, you know, I've seen a lot of people solve stuff with much smaller, but your odds of false positives get greater when you start getting into that 8 centimorgan
That's
threshold.
a good one. Well, thank you for sharing it with us. I appreciate it.
fun.
This has been so fun, and you're a wonderful host. Thank you for letting me be here and hanging out with you because it's just been a great trip.
Yeah,
I've
I'm
loved
glad
it.
you're here.
It's super fun.
Anytime.
Well, if you want, go on over to Connie's channel to hear my story.
Great story.
And anyway, we'll see you next time. Bye.